We are again, your annual refresher training on high-altitude physiology. Before you get hypoxic, let's review what we have to cover. Spend some time refreshing your memory on these topics, and then we'll put it all in perspective with a real-life experience of one of our pilots. Per FARs, we have to cover respiration and hypoxia, duration of consciousness at altitude without supplemental oxygen, gas expansion and bubble formation, physical phenomena, and incidence of rapid decompression. Everyone knows what hypoxia is. It's the lack of oxygen caused by, in the case of aviators, the partial pressure of oxygen at altitude. You probably remember some of the symptoms, which can include tingling in the fingers, tunnel vision, headaches, a flushed feeling in the face, difficulties in concentrating, and a feeling of general euphoria. Remember, the symptoms of hypoxia are insidious. They can creep up on you. And since you may have a feeling of general well-being, you may not care that you are becoming incapacitated. There are factors that can accelerate the onset of hypoxia, which include age, weight, whether or not you smoke, your overall condition of health, and alcohol consumption. From your operating manual, you can expect times of useful consciousness during a rapid decompression to be 1 to 2 minutes at 25,000 feet and 15 to 20 seconds at 40,000 feet. However, these are only estimates. During any decompression or the onset of any symptoms of hypoxia, don your oxygen masks immediately. Some other consequences of high-altitude exposure are gas expansion and bubble formation. Boyle's law states that as pressure decreases, gas volume increases. This increase in gas volume can lead to intestinal bloating and pain in the sinus areas, and in the middle ear. Decompression sickness, or dysbarism, is caused by gas bubble formation due to the loss of pressure at high altitude. As pressure decreases, gas bubbles come out of solution in the blood and body tissues, much like opening a can of soda. These bubbles cannot escape from the body and can cause symptoms of a burning sensation in the chest and a dry cough called the chokes, as well as pain in the joints known as the bends. Decompression sickness is unlikely to occur below 18,000 feet cabin pressure. However, scuba diving can accelerate the onset of dysbarism. Refer to Flight Manual Part 1 for restrictions on scuba diving prior to flight. The treatment for decompression sickness is an immediate descent to force the gas bubbles back into solution. Now that we've covered the required material, let's talk about a real-life incident of an explosive decompression. An Air Force C-141 was en route from Antigua in the Caribbean to Ascension Island in the middle of the South Atlantic in the fall of 1988. Cruise altitude was flight level 370, with 9 crew members and 23 passengers. Flying as co-pilot on this aircraft was Paul Rancatore, an American Airlines first officer.
Hi, I'm Paul Rancatore, and as a result of an explosive decompression I had in 1988, I was asked to give a brief description of the experiences that I had to help in our recurrent training. The situation takes about 2 hours into our flight, and we just completed a seat swap. The jump seat rider and myself are talking. Then the airplane experienced a little bit of turbulence. I came back to look back at the engine instruments, and then the airplane snaps left, banks left. The number 1 oil pressure light illuminates. Then the airplane snaps right, kicks right, and the number 4 low oil pressure light illuminates. Then the airplane starts to fill with smoke, or appears to be smoke, and then I feel the oxygen get sucked out of my body. So I reached over my right shoulder, grabbed my oxygen mask, pulled it down, gang loaded to 100% oxygen, pressure demand. Looked down at the ADI, and the airplane's in a 15-degree right bank, 25 degrees, nose low, with the autopilot disengaged. So I rolled the airplane's wings level, pushed the nose down, started the emergency depressurization checklist, sweep, glanced over my left shoulder, and I noticed that the EP is trying to grab his mask. I look back into the back of the cockpit, and I see the jump seat rider on the cockpit floor, convulsing violently. His body's convulsing so violently, it's actually lifting off the floor, pounding the floor. Then his body becomes very rigid, straight, turns a dark purple or a black. His eyes roll back and mouth open, looked like he was dead. I came back to the front of the airplane, starting the descent, however, keeping in mind that if we slow to a certain airspeed, which calls for the checklist, the people that are unconscious might be brain dead by the time we get down to an oxygen-rich altitude. So I deviate from that procedure, push the nose down, increase the airspeed, which I cannot see the airspeed indicator or any instruments because they're obscured by condensation. So I keep in my mind that if the airplane can't handle the airspeed, it will give me an indication through vibration or a similar sign. I give a mayday call off to PRCO and VHF. They do not acknowledge, and I don't expect them to. Fortunately, I've already established HF communications with Ascension Island before we departed Antigua. They come up and I tell them the situation. I give them a lat and long. My main concern is them knowing where we're at, if they can find the airplane, because I know if we do go in the water, they won't be able to find us. I glance over at the EP, and he's still having difficulty with his mask. I scan back to the front of the airplane, and the airplane now is engulfed in St. Elmo's fire, which adds to the dramatics. I turn the airplane around off the NDB, which is the only instrument that's visible in the cockpit. And about that time, the evaluate engineer that was in the cockpit is downstairs, and he's on headset, and radios up, says that the number 2 emergency escape hatch has separated from the fuselage, and everything in the vicinity has departed. All 23 passengers, including the loadmasters, are unconscious. In the cockpit, the jump seat rider was eventually revived. The evaluator pilot eventually came to. However, he was in a hypoxic state, and he exhibited the classic symptoms of hypoxia, where you fixate in space, you don't acknowledge certain phrases, you're just sitting there. However, he did try to take control of the airplane in a violent fashion, and I shook him off the yoke and continued to fly the airplane until he was in a comfortable situation, because he still, like I said, was in a hypoxic state and was having difficulty acknowledging what was taking place. The engineer and myself are running the checklist. Although we cannot communicate well with one another, we understand each other's actions. We're vocalizing things that we're doing to make sure that we are accomplishing the checklist. Flew the entire flight back at 10,000 feet. All the passengers eventually were revived. However, many were having problems with their joints, classic symptoms of the bends, bleeding through the nose. So I had everyone stay on oxygen, including the crew members, for the entire flight back, and flew close to 3 hours back to Antigua off the NDB. Eventually the engine instruments cleared up, and I was able to find out our speed and engine parameters. During the descent, both engines were regained, started those as well in the descent. To wrap up, I'd like to leave you with 4 points. Number 1, oxygen hypoxia. Understand your symptoms, general symptoms. Take care of yourself first. Number 2, time of useful consciousness. In our case, TUC was 5 to 10 seconds, opposed to a minute and a half. Gas and bubble formations. Understand the bends. And fourthly, communications. Understand you should have a HF backup or a VHF backup. That's why to this day I fly with no pants.